22 days into this war, Iran just sent a message that every defense analyst, every NATO general, and every government in Europe needs to read very carefully. And that message was not written in words. It was written in the trajectory of 2 ballistic missiles fired at a target that the entire Western military establishment believed was out of reach. There is a small coral atoll sitting in the middle of the Indian Ocean that most people have never heard of and most maps barely show. It is called Diego Garcia. It is approximately 10 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers long, including its lagoon. It sits roughly 4,000 kilometers from the coast of Iran. It is so remote, so isolated, so far from anything that most military analysts have long considered it effectively untouchable. It is the base from which America's most powerful bombers have launched strikes across the Middle East for decades. It hosts B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the only aircraft on the planet capable of carrying the 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator bunker buster that can reach Iran's deepest underground nuclear facilities. It houses nuclear submarines, nuclear-capable aircraft, surveillance systems, Space Force operations, and approximately 2,500 American and British military personnel. The United States has officially described Diego Garcia as an all but indispensable platform for security operations in the Middle East, South Asia, and East Africa. And on Friday, March 20th, Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles directly at it. This is not a story about what Iran did not hit. This is a story about what Iran just proved it can reach. Before we get into the full strategic meaning of what happened, let us go through exactly what occurred because the details matter enormously here. According to multiple U.S. officials cited by the Wall Street Journal, Iran launched 2 intermediate-range ballistic missiles targeting the Diego Garcia base. One of the missiles failed in flight and did not reach the island. A U.S. warship fired an SM-3 interceptor at the second missile. It remains unclear whether the interceptor successfully destroyed it or whether the missile failed on its own. Neither missile hit the base. The UK Ministry of Defense condemned what it called Iran's reckless attacks. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office confirmed that ministers had approved U.S. forces' use of British bases for defensive operations, including Diego Garcia. And Iran's state-affiliated media boasted afterward that Iran's missile range is beyond what the enemy previously imagined. That last sentence is the one that changes everything. Because here is what the international community believed about Iran's missile capabilities before Friday. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi had stated publicly and explicitly that Iran had deliberately self-limited the range of its ballistic missiles to 2,000 kilometers. That was Iran's official stated policy. That was the publicly declared ceiling on how far Tehran would reach with its missiles. Diego Garcia is approximately 4,000 kilometers from Iran. That is exactly double the range Iran claimed it was staying within. What Friday's strike attempt reveals is one of 3 possibilities. Either Iran was lying about the 2,000-kilometer limit for years and always had longer range capability that it kept hidden, or Iran has developed new missile systems since the war began that break through that previously stated ceiling. Or Iran made a deliberate political decision to abandon its self-imposed restraint in direct response to the UK's decision to allow American bombers to use Diego Garcia for strikes on Iranian targets. All 3 of these possibilities are deeply alarming in different ways. And defense analysts are now urgently assessing which one is true. Bloomberg's reporting on the event was precise and significant. They wrote that the strike attempt demonstrated a weapons capability that goes beyond what Tehran was known to have possessed. The Aviationist, one of the most credible open-source military analysis publications, identified the likely missile used as the Khorramshahr-4, an Iranian intermediate-range ballistic missile that analysts had previously assessed as having a range of over 4,000 kilometers, though it had only been proven operationally at between 2,000 and 3,000 kilometers. Friday's attack, if it was indeed the Khorramshahr-4, would represent the first confirmed operational use of an Iranian ballistic missile at this range. It is also, according to the Aviationist, Iran's first operational use of intermediate-range ballistic missiles at all in this war. For 22 days, Iran has been hitting targets within its previously acknowledged range. On day 22, it reached 4,000 kilometers, and the Aviationist noted something that should make every European government pay careful attention. A distance of 4,000 kilometers from Iran is well within the range separating Tehran from many European capitals. What Iran demonstrated on Friday was not just that it can reach Diego Garcia. It demonstrated that it has the capability, if it chooses to use it, to reach Rome, Paris, Berlin, Warsaw, and London. To understand why Diego Garcia was the target that Iran chose, you need to understand what happened in the 24 hours before those missiles were fired. The United Kingdom had been one of the American alliance members that had been most cautious about its involvement in this war. Britain had drawn clear lines, saying it would allow the U.S. to use its bases, including RAF Fairford in England and Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, only for specific and limited defensive operations. Initially, that meant the U.S. could use the bases to protect against missile attacks threatening British interests. It explicitly did not include offensive strikes on Iranian territory. Then, on Friday, March 20th, the UK government took a significant step and expanded that permission. Keir Starmer's office confirmed that ministers had approved U.S. defensive operations to degrade missile sites and capabilities being used to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz. That expansion of permission, that decision to allow American bombers at Diego Garcia to strike Iranian missile capabilities along the Hormuz coastline, was announced on Friday. Iran fired missiles at Diego Garcia the same day. The timing was not a coincidence. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi said so explicitly. In a post on social media on Friday, he said Starmer is putting British lives in danger by allowing UK bases to be used for aggression against Iran. He said Iran will exercise its right to self-defense. The message was clear. Britain expanded the permission for Diego Garcia to be used against Iran. Iran fired missiles at Diego Garcia within hours. This is a direct cause and effect sequence that Britain and the United States need to understand in its full implications. Every time a new country allows its territory to be used against Iran, Iran will attempt to respond by targeting that territory. This is not a threat. It is a demonstrated pattern, and the UK now has Iranian missiles fired at one of its bases. Trump's reaction to this sequence of events was characteristically contradictory. On one hand, he criticized the UK for taking too long to give the US permission to use Diego Garcia, saying they should have acted a lot faster. On the other hand, he appeared to partially distance America from the full burden of Hormuz security, writing on Truth Social that the Strait of Hormuz will have to be guarded and policed by other nations who use it, and that the United States does not use the strait. Both of these positions cannot be simultaneously true. If Britain was too slow in giving America access to Diego Garcia, that implies America needs that access for its own military objectives. If the Strait of Hormuz needs to be managed by other nations because America does not use it, that implies America's goals in this war are not primarily about the strait. The contradiction reflects a broader confusion about what this war is trying to achieve and who is responsible for managing its consequences, a confusion that has been present since day one and has not resolved. Now let us talk about what Diego Garcia actually is, because most viewers, even most people who follow geopolitics closely, do not understand the full significance of what was targeted on Friday. Diego Garcia sits in the center of the Indian Ocean, roughly 700 kilometers south of the Maldives. It is part of the Chagos Archipelago, technically British territory, but under full U.S. operational control. The U.S. has been operating there since the 1970s, a process that involved the British government forcibly evicting as many as 2,000 Chagosian people from their homes so the military base could be built. That displacement remains a human rights case study in the consequences of strategic military planning. But the strategic logic behind the choice of location is undeniable. Diego Garcia sits equidistant from the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the mouth of the Red Sea, and the Malacca Strait near the South China Sea, approximately 3,000 kilometers from each. From there, America can project military power across the Indian Ocean, the Middle East, South Asia, and East Africa, without depending on access through politically complicated Gulf airspace. The base's runway stretches over 3,600 meters, long enough to operate every major aircraft in the American strategic bomber fleet. That includes the B-52 Stratofortress, the B-1B Lancer, and most critically, the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. The B-2 is the only aircraft in the world that can carry the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, the 30,000-pound weapon capable of penetrating up to 200 feet of reinforced concrete and 260 feet of solid rock. This is the weapon that was specifically designed to destroy Iran's deepest underground nuclear facilities, including the Fordo enrichment site buried under a mountain. The B-2 can fly sorties of over 40 hours, can be refueled in flight, and can reach deep into Iranian territory and return without landing at any base in the Gulf region. This matters enormously because it means Diego Garcia allows the United States to conduct the most strategically significant bombing missions against Iran without needing permission from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, or any other Gulf state. Diego Garcia is American independence from Gulf state politics. It is the backstop that makes the entire military campaign possible, even if every Gulf ally decided tomorrow to withdraw its cooperation. Iran knows this. Iran has understood for years that Diego Garcia is the platform from which the most devastating strikes on its most protected infrastructure could be launched. That is why Iranian military officials have previously threatened it explicitly. In 2022, a senior Iranian general said Iran could strike Diego Garcia with ballistic missiles. At the time, Western analysts dismissed this as bluster because Iran's known missile range did not credibly reach the island. Friday changed that calculation. The Wall Street Journal's reporting described the attack as the first significant attempt to reach far beyond the Middle East and threaten U.S. interests. The attempted strike represents a genuinely new phase in Iran's military posture. There is another dimension to this attack that goes beyond the purely military calculus. The UK's decision to allow U.S. use of Diego Garcia has been deeply controversial in British domestic politics. Large portions of the UK public oppose involvement in this war. Iran's foreign minister cited the majority of the UK population as not wanting any part in what he called the Israel-US war of choice on Iran. Iran's decision to fire missiles at Diego Garcia hours after Britain expanded the base's operational permissions is a calculated message aimed not just at the British military, but at the British public and British Parliament. It is designed to raise the political cost of UK involvement in this war. If Iran can put missiles in the vicinity of a major British military installation, then Britain's participation in the conflict carries real risks to British personnel and British military assets. That calculation is now visible to every British voter and every British member of Parliament in a way it was not before Friday. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, in his Saturday briefing, said U.S. forces remain on plan to eliminate Iran's ability to project meaningful power outside its borders, and that progress is obvious. He said Iran's Navy is not sailing, its tactical fighters are not flying, and it has lost the ability to launch missiles and drones at the high rates seen at the beginning of the conflict. He said the U.S. has struck 8,000 military targets, including 130 Iranian vessels. And yet on the same day that statement was issued, Iran fired ballistic missiles at a base 4,000 kilometers from its coast, doubling the range it publicly claimed to have, and demonstrated a missile capability that the Wall Street Journal said goes beyond what Tehran was known to possess. The gap between CENTCOM's assessment of Iran's degraded capability and Iran's demonstrated capability on Friday is a gap that needs explaining. At the same time as the Diego Garcia attack, Israel and the U.S. struck the Natanz nuclear enrichment facility. Russian Foreign Ministry condemned the attack on Natanz. Putin sent Nowruz greetings to Iran's supreme leader and president, calling Russia a loyal friend and reliable partner to Iran during this difficult period. An Iranian cluster bomb struck a daycare center in Rishon LeZion in central Israel. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said attacks against Iran will increase significantly in the coming week. And Trump said from the White House South Lawn that he does not want a ceasefire because you do not do a ceasefire when you are obliterating the other side. But the country that just put ballistic missiles within range of a British-American base in the middle of the Indian Ocean is still fighting. The country whose navy has been sunk, whose air force has been grounded, whose leadership has been systematically eliminated over 22 consecutive days, still managed to extend its reach to 4,000 kilometers and demonstrate a missile capability that the entire Western intelligence community did not know it had. If Iran can reach Diego Garcia, a base that was specifically chosen decades ago precisely because of its distance from potential adversaries, then the geography of this war has fundamentally changed. The question that every defense planner in Washington, London, and Tel Aviv is now asking is not whether Diego Garcia was hit. Neither missile landed. The question is what else Iran can reach that the world has not yet accounted for. Subscribe right now. Because this war is expanding its geographic scope faster than any news cycle can track, and every development in the next 48 hours matters. And tell me in the comments, do you think Iran's ability to reach Diego Garcia changes how Britain and other allies will calculate their involvement in this war, or will it harden their resolve to finish what started on February 28th?